It's on? Oh, perfect. All right. I'm not like, I can't stand at one of those things or sit on a chair, so we'll get right into it. So the gaming revolution will be televised, right? So my name is Andre Swanson. I'm the CEO, co-founder of a company called Find. Find is a subscription-free cloud gaming platform built specifically for smart TVs. I'll give you a little bit of background about me that's relevant in terms of kind of the smart TV ecosystem. So Find's my second startup. My first startup was a company called True Optic. He's patented the concept of a household graph back in 2014 and pretty much powered all of the growth of back-end identity resolution and targeting on smart TV advertising. So here's some companies that we powered, over the last decade in some called their monetization on back-end. Pluto TV, Tubi TV, Xumo, Sony Crackle, Peacock on the video side, on smart speakers, Pandora, Odyssey, iHeart. So kind of the last 12 years or so of my life is spent monetizing advertising on streaming in this country. And I've always been really, really bullish that there's a much bigger opportunity for gaming than even video or audio. But I've been through a bunch of these sessions over the last 24 hours. And I've heard a lot of people say the same thing. Kind of the growth is stagnating in the gaming market. So I'm not going to pound on that too much more. I think everybody here probably knows that better than I do. I think what is interesting though is the way that people are addressing the consumer problems are kind of counterintuitive, right? So you're hearing all the players, the consumers complaining about the expense, right? They're talking about, discovery is really hard to find the games that they want, or the complexity as you're moving across from different publishers and different platforms. So what is the industry doing to solve that problem over the last few years? Well, let's just raise the prices, right? And lay off a lot of the talent. That's going to solve the problem of being able to better cater to gamers. I digress. Now, let's just talk about what the real opportunity here is. The real opportunity is cloud gaming. That is the only way that we're going to solve the issue of being able to make more money, have more jobs, and make the gaming economy work for people, right? So we've done a lot of research on this. So my chief research officer working for me at True Optic, he was at Nielsen prior to that. And we're highly confident that you're talking about, and with the numbers that you've already seen over the last few years, over a 50% annual growth rate for cloud gaming. That's massive growth for any industry. That's awesome. But really what that's going to be driven by is the growth of advertising in cloud gaming, particularly when you have subscription-free solutions, right? Now, what a lot of people don't realize is gaming on the large screen is so far behind every other major medium in terms of using advertising as a source of monetization, right? So if you look at traditional TV, you're talking about 2/3 of all revenue on traditional TV comes from advertising, right? Almost half of all revenue on streaming TV even, right? Think about it. 10 years ago, streaming TV was all subscription-based, right? The Netflix, there was really no scale in terms of the ad-supported. Now 40% of the revenue alone comes from ad-supported. Even the subscription solutions have ads, right? On streaming right now. Mobile games have done a pretty good job, right? Almost 1/3 of all revenue for mobile games is on advertising. But when you look at the large screen, right, and the large screen in every setting, the largest medium is the most potentially profitable medium. They're only having 7% of all revenue coming from PC and console gaming being from advertising. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity tucked away there. I want to give some context to this, right? So this is a big one. If we think about your television, right, over the last 40 years, right? You've always had some sort of ancillary device hooked up to your TV, right? In the 70s and 80s, you had Betamax, VCR hooked up to your TV so you could watch stuff. Then, you had consoles then too, right? Because you had Atari. Then in the 90s, you had the cable box, right? So that you can watch all these different channels. And you had consoles, right? Nintendo. Then in the 90s, you had the DVD player, and eventually the Blu-ray, right? And guess what? You just had newer types of consoles, right? Then in the 2000s, you had your dongles, right? So that you can stream stuff over the top, right? Your Fire Sticks, your Roku sticks. And you had just newer versions of the same consoles. And then now You have none of that other stuff, periphery hooked up to your TVs, right? Your smart TVs, you have apps. You don't need a VCR. You can watch anything on demand. You have DVR in case of all these, in terms of all these digital capabilities. You can stream 4K. You don't need a Blu-ray or anything like that. Even the dongles, the Fire Sticks and the Roku sticks, their year-over-year sales dropped by 40% last year, right? So everything that hooks up to your TV in terms of a secondary device has gone obsolete, except for gaming consoles. And so I think that is why are we still holding on to when every other medium has kind of advanced to use the TV as the hub of that. And so really what this means is that the tremendous opportunity is that smart TVs, just like they've replaced the VCR and the cable box and the DVD player and the streaming dongle with their operating systems and devices, they're really the opportunity for the hub of all media and entertainment. And that means smart TVs really are gaming consoles. The only difference between a smart TV and a gaming console is that there's a shit ton more houses around the world that have smart TVs in them than gaming consoles, right? So in the United States, you're talking about twice as many homes have a smart TV capable of streaming video games than have an Xbox, PlayStation, or Nintendo combined, right? When you go to international markets, it's closer to 3x. And so there's a tremendous opportunity in terms of thinking of smart TVs as the largest console. And so when we talk about those kind of consumer benefits, right? Access, choice, affordability, that's really what there is. But then also when you talk about from the studios and the developers, new opportunities for user acquisition, right? New opportunities for revenue, and really the ability to kind of just focus on what you do best. But I'm not saying something that's just kind of out of the blue or here the data supports it, but there's no like action for it. So Xbox, right? They've recently announced also bringing Game Pass to LG, but prior to that, it was just on Samsung. Xbox Game Pass was available on less than 20% of the smart TVs in the world, and it was already 25% of all their cloud gaming. So that means with just being on 20% of the smart TVs in the world, right, over a short period of time, it's already bigger than the cloud streaming on, Xbox Series X or Xbox One, or on all of mobile or all of PC, right? And so that's tremendous when you think about what that growth trajectory really is as you talk about getting on more devices, right? So one of the things that people always say when we talk about, well, okay, but I don't want my games on smart TV because of the latency and the performance and stuff like that. This isn't 10 years ago, right? When most households didn't even have 25 megabyte bandwidth, right? Literally, you're talking about, a Finder, our test, we're seeing 1 to 2 frames delay. You can play any game, AAA, casual, it doesn't matter, right? You're talking about massive potential distribution. And then also we'll talk a little bit later about the different types of controllers that you can use. But pretty much every smart TV made in the last 5 years, you can hook up a traditional gamepad via Bluetooth to, right? So there's lots of huge opportunity there. One of the things that I'll say is just to give another idea before we go in a little bit more specifically about what's happening on the actual screens of smart TVs is gaming has to grow significantly. And I think one of the challenges that I've heard people talking about is how does it grow? Is it AI? Well, AI can make gaming more efficient. It's not going to all of a sudden get you hundreds of millions of more players, right? Or I'm really bullish on portable gaming devices, right? But there's not hundreds of millions of people that are going to play because now they can play on a portable gaming device that weren't playing when they could play on a mobile phone or a gaming console. You have to talk about something truly transformative in terms of changing the total addressable market opportunity is. And when you look at the number of consumers that are engaging weekly on streaming, on watching television or listening to audio on a TV, it's double that are gaming, right? And it's been that for decades. When you talk about the average time spent, right, it's almost 4x that watching TV is gaming. And so there's a tremendous amount of growth opportunity if we kind of lower these barriers to entry for people, right? One more thing that I'll say is that everybody says, well, cloud gaming is going to be subscription-based, isn't going to be ad-supported. I would say there's no evidence for that in any sort of medium of entertainment over the last decade, period. Like all of the data, whether it's for streaming audio, for streaming video, says the exact opposite, right? And so if you look at it now, there's actually more homes as of the end of 2024 that watch subscription-free ad-supported TV than subscription-based TV, right? Like that was unheard of 5 or 6 years ago. But as you give people more and more opportunity, that changes as well, right? And so why is this so important to the brands? Like why do brands care, right? So they care because gamers spend time gaming. Gamers are normally forward-moving when it comes to technology. They're more loyal to brands. There's high engagement in terms of watching ads on gaming solutions, right? One of the other things that I think is really important to realize too is that you can't have an interruptive ad experience, right? Nobody wants the game. I know developers don't want it and the gamers don't want their game being randomly paused in the middle of the game to show an ad. So it also needs to be smart in terms of how you're thinking about giving that experience. The other thing that's been a challenge, I think, in terms of scaling the economics for gaming is that people haven't used kind of the standard ways that the major ad tech platforms and the agencies do in terms of planning media and measuring media and targeting media. And kind of what my background is over the last 12 years is like I literally, frankly, helped build most of those frameworks for advertising on a smart TV. So the ability for the gaming community to do that on smart TV is actually quite easy. Let's see. The other thing is kind of the walled gardens. That's another challenge. You don't want to have one parameter for measurement or targeting ads on Samsung and another one on LG and another one on Roku and another one on Vizio. That doesn't scale for anybody easier. So when we look at this, and we're going to come into some kind of real applicable places, and I really want to have time for questions, and I'm more of a conversation type guy anyway, is yes, there's going to be opportunity for subscription fees on smart TV gaming. There's going to be opportunities to just sell games for the $49.99 and $59.99 and whatever on smart TVs. There's going to be tons of opportunity for in-game revenue and new opportunities for advertising revenue share. Just to give you an example, and I'll ask a question here. Where do you think the engagement level is higher? When somebody is just passively watching television and an ad plays before their show comes back on, or when somebody is holding a gamepad and there's a 15-second countdown window before their game starts? Like, where do you think they're paying more attention to what's going on the screen? On the gaming side or on the TV side? Raise your hand if you think it's the gaming side. Okay, you would be right by a lot. And so what that means is if there's more engagement, you can charge more for the ad. And so you're talking about premium ad dollars on a TV compared to what TV makes, right? So I think that's something that's really exciting. You're also talking about pre-roll experiences, so not something that's interrupting the gameplay at all. Next, the other thing that's a huge opportunity on the gaming side is kind of sponsored content, sponsored experiences, right? Quest, achievement tracking tied to brands. So, hey, if you play our game for 100 hours, maybe you get a discount at Walmart. Or, hey, if you can get to this board, or if you can start a party and include 10 friends to to enter this challenge on the game, you can get the next board free, or you can get a gift card to Target. It doesn't matter what it is. There's a huge opportunity. There's nothing like the kind of communal experience on a gaming studio. And then obviously traditional in-game transactions, that's easy. But I think what we also don't realize is that a lot of these smart TVs, people already have their credit card synced to the smart TV, right? They already have it so that they can pay for their subscriptions, or they can, buy the pay-per-view movie or the $19.99 movie in between when it comes out on Disney Plus and the movie theaters. And so being able to do in-game transactions is quite easy. One other thing is that I don't think people appreciate is this happens over and over again. There is going to be a migration from some mobile game playing to smart TV gaming, which I think gives even more opportunities for additional types of games. And we've seen this with Netflix in terms of people starting more so on desktop and mobile and then gravitating to smart TV. Even YouTube, by the end of this year, more viewing of YouTube will happen on a smart TV than mobile and PC combined. Like, that's wild if you really think about it. So as you make games more available on smart TVs, you're going to see some of that shift happen, right? Here's the one challenge, though. It is not as easy an ecosystem, right? On mobile, you have iOS and Android. Nothing else really matters in terms of operating system. On PC, I know, you can have games on Mac, but, PC, you're talking about Windows, right? then on console, you essentially had Xbox, Nintendo, and PlayStation for the last 20 years, right? Obviously, there's Series X versus this and that, and PlayStation 4 versus PlayStation 5, but essentially you've had three things. Well, on smart TVs, you have something like 15 different operating systems. No operating system has more than 25% market share. And even in like a Samsung, they may have 25% market share. There's a difference between the 2023 models and the 25 models and the 2020 models. And oh, by the way, to complicate it even more, there's a difference between a 42-inch, a 55-inch, a 77-inch, OLED, and LED, and stuff like that. So there's some complexities. So it is difficult for a game developer to go and say, hey, I am going to make my game for smart TV, unless you want to deal with, I hear game developers complaining about managing Android and iOS versions of their game. And so good luck having, 57 variations of your game to be able to have full scale. And so the good thing about that is that's where there's companies, and Find isn't the only one, but there's companies that you really have to build to one cloud solution. And then that cloud solution has to deal with all the headaches to make sure that the game is distributed everywhere. Another thing that we've really spent a lot of time on is looking at kind of what are the need states and like gaming segments. And the one thing that's really interesting about this is that it's kind of akin to TV, right? If you're talking about what are the need states for a TV solution, Netflix, right, has content for everybody, right? So you have to have kind of content that matches with everybody. But what's really, really interesting is almost half of all smart TV gamers have never played a game on the big screen before, ever. So you want to talk about an opportunity for growth for the gaming industry? There's hundreds of millions of people that will play games on smart TVs over the next 36 months that have never, ever, 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 ever played a console game on a TV or a PC game ever in their life, right? So that's another reason why I'm saying there's going to be a big shift from mobile to smart TV, or there's just going to be net new users. But what's really interesting is the sweet spot for this is kind of family entertainment, right? Like, I remember one of the most memorable things I can remember of my kids' childhoods, like 3-year-old son, 5-year-old daughter, and my wife, and us playing Mario Kart and like Mario Party on Wii U. Like, literally, I can still remember that. It doesn't really happen anymore, but I think that can be awesome. One other thing that I'll share with you is kind of preferred controller usage, right? So right now, and this varies dramatically by market. So this is kind of a holistic, leaning a bit US heavy, but 12% are using their TV remote. That's hyper casual games that you just need directional pad and single button at a time input to play, right? Smartphone, using your smartphone as kind of the remote is a little bit less than a quarter, but still hooking up your gamepad to the TV via Bluetooth is the overwhelming number one way that people are gaming. So that allows you to play pretty much any type of game. If you were to switch this for a market like Brazil, the gamepad is something like 85%, right? So because it's essentially replaced the console already in certain markets. Just quick recap. Technical barriers are really not there anymore. So that should not be an excuse for not thinking about a serious strategy for distributing any games or developing games for smart TV. It's really something that I think helps the consumers, helps the studios, the manufacturers. There's a huge amount of demand for it from an advertising standpoint. And I will say something that I said about 10 years ago when I was at a Beat Retreat, which is a similar conference, but in like the television and advertising industry. It's very similar to GamesBeat. And I said that there's going to be 3 types of people in this room, right? So there's the people that have right now a smart TV strategy and will be the first movers and do really well and probably make a lot of money. There'll be the second wave. It's easier to be the second wave if you're from a big studio and you have a lot of money. You can be late and just spend your way into being relevant. If you're independent or double A, you just made it a lot harder on yourself because you're playing catch up. And then there'll be the naysayers that probably won't be here in 3 years anyway, right? So like that's really you're in one of those three groups. And I'm highly confident about that. So that's it. Any questions?
Any questions? Thank you. And we have a little bit more time. Yes.
So I love this, and I was a subscriber to Stavia when Google did it. So like, where do you think they fell off? Because in all intents and purposes, it was kind of a failure for them, and the same kind of concept is being applied here. So what's your kind of input on maybe what they could have done better and why it failed and why going through a smart TV would work better?
Yeah, so I can't talk as much about kind of the technical issues inside of Google or what they did or didn't do to make it not be successful. But I will talk about some of the more macro things that I think impacted them. If you think about two things, what percentage of the US had like 5G back when Stadia was out? Like almost nobody, right? So, I mean, there was just a performance issue because of the infrastructure that was available to them. Same thing with other cloud solutions that may have come for gaming 4 or 5 years ago. What percentage of the US, 5, 6 years ago, even Netflix was wondering if would they be able to stream enough HD, right? And the whole conversation was about throttling bandwidth even for streaming solutions on your TV. So I think the capacity and the infrastructure to make something like this viable is just a lot more now. And I think that affects Stadia or everybody else on Stadia. The other thing too is like Google just had no perseverance relative to doing it. They just didn't care enough to keep going. So I've got like, I self-funded the whole first 2 years of this. So I've got a lot of perseverance in that I've already got a lot of my money on the hook. So I'm going to keep going. So there's that.
Yes, any other question? But I have seen that trying to put mobile games on the big screen, and back in 2017, I was in Paris. Huawei was doing a huge conference, and they fly all their game developers were trying to showcase their games on the big screen. It failed, and then I think the advertising industry. I think it's kicking in sexually normally crucial and understand the different segment and their competitors. That's where you can tap into the niche is expensive.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's definitely some of it. Look, I mean, 8 years ago, and is like an eternity in terms of just everything relative to TVs, technology, and stuff like that. And the other thing is too is on the TVs, Roku's had a lot of games. I was playing, was it Bug Game? It was big money 10 years ago with the remote. But a lot of those games had to be much smaller because none of these TVs have enough memory to have bigger games. And so I think the difference now with cloud gaming is that you can have much more of that diversity of games on, because you're not limited to what infrastructure on the devices.
Hi, so I am totally new to this kind of conversation, so forgive me if this question is deplorably naive. But
there's no bad question.
Fantastic. But I'm hearing you talk, and what immediately comes to mind for me are growing up with the TV games that were integrated into DVDs for animated movies. Are there any conversations happening about integrating something like this with existing streaming platforms to work cooperatively with television shows? Because that's a really formative and nostalgic memory for me. It seems like a pretty natural collaboration.
Were you listening to my meeting earlier this morning?
No, I promise it was.
I'm teasing. Look, there's a ton of opportunity for kind of interactive content, I think. You don't want to think about the user state of mind, right? When you're watching content, having the ability to play something that aligns with it. And there's already some precedent for that. So it's not either you or I is creating, a new wheel or anything like that. But yeah, I think you're spot on in terms of that. That's true.
Anybody else? Yes.
Hi, this is really interesting and informative. Thanks very much.
So throughout the conference for the last 2 days, we've been talking about growth, and I think one thing that I find very interesting is that we're very much focused on the Western thinking when it comes to gaming, the growth, the emergence of this. You mentioned Brazil, so Latin America, and Africa as well is huge when it comes to the gaming market, but also the accessibility to smart TVs, but it's far little out there in terms of comparison of how consoles cost. What is your, I guess, what I would love to hear your thoughts about expanding beyond the Western market and how Fines, well, thank you, maybe I came in a bit late. But yeah, how Fines can kind of solve that problem for especially people in the non-Americans, like are in Latin America, for instance.
Great question. I'm actually much more bullish on non-Western Europe than I am on Western Europe, and it's because of console penetration, right? So if you look at like markets like Sub-Saharan Africa, like Indonesia, so the smart TV penetration is literally almost 3x that of the gaming console penetration, and so when you think of the opportunity for growing gaming, it really is those markets that are actually going to thrive. That you'll also in the fact that it can be subscription free and ad supported. Many of those markets have strong ad markets. We talked about Brazil, Nigeria, Ghana, South Asia, Australia. Like they have there's a lot of money to be made in advertising in those markets. They're in many instances younger average age. So yeah, I'm like right with you. That is a huge opportunity for them. Yeah.
Sorry, Sol.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks again for the talk. Some meaty data in your slides. So really appreciate that. One question I have is in some of the other talks, there's been mention of really designing games for Gen Z, Gen Alpha, which will be more mobile kind of oriented, spending a lot of time competing against short form video, competing against social media. In what you've looked at, you look at the eyeball time for television versus mobile, and that audience that seems to lean more towards mobile and short form video. How do you see that playing out with smart TV?
So I do think you're right. There's especially with younger teens and particularly with social media, right? You know, the Snapchats and the TikTok, the stuff like that, really nabbing. But I think what makes me feel like there's still a tremendous opportunity even with that audience is specifically gaming. Two things, and then YouTube. So even on YouTube, those younger ages are starting to watch more and more YouTube on TV, right? There's massive growth in their streaming YouTube on smart TVs. And so you're seeing that there, people generally just lean to the biggest, most premium device. There's also more like communal and social interaction when you're watching TV, right? The other people in the room as opposed to your smart TV, your smartphone is very, very singular. One of the things too that we did, let's bring this slide up, is where we did the kind of need state. This slide right here, right? And so there's a ton of, it's a very broad opportunity in terms of what the gaming and development of types of games on smart TV. It isn't like, hey, it has to be this type of game or that type of game. And those kind of more casual games that can be socially interactive, whether that's family or friends hanging out, actually is probably, there's nothing that is overwhelmingly more, but that is probably the area that's the biggest sweet spot.
That actually was my question. What's your priority stack here when you look at the breakdown from the latest user demo? It was like, which we want to social marketing.
Yeah, I say that answer is probably different in the U.S. than in some of those emerging markets that I talked about. I think in the emerging markets, it's actually going after the triple and A gaming console type unit, right? Because there's not as much access to those games in those markets. The device, but like some of the tariffs, forget all the tariffs craziness going on now. Like in Brazil, to buy a console and a game, it's like thousands of dollars, right, in many respects. And so if you can get that game, you can replace the console in some of these markets where the console never really had penetration in some of those markets, and it'll never grow. It, like, the smart TV will be the default gaming console in some of those emerging markets. I think in the US, where we already have relatively high console penetration, it's not necessarily chasing after people that are already playing Madden on their PlayStation to convert to play Madden on their Samsung or their LG. Is not really adding anything, any opportunity for the room, but it's those families that, or those individuals that used to game and will not pay $500 or $400 for a new machine and $59.99 for a game. But if they could just stream some games on their TV, they absolutely will game, and they'll game for hours per week. Like, that to me is the real difference.
Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Advertising it's auto. Where are some of the blind spots? Some should be way up where that tend to trip up or different. What's creating that on the tech side or business side?
There. So I'll give you some overview, and I could speak more to kind of find. I don't know every cloud solution, and some of the ones that are with more native cloud solutions for PC or desktop. Yeah. So I think a lot of it is the pain points that we're dealing with as a company. Like, how do you make our SDKs, our game development kit is easy for publishers and studio developers to integrate with us. We're doing all that can't work on the different OSs. So the developer doesn't actually have to worry about that. So I think it's some of that. One thing that I will say, a lot of conversations that we're having is how, for like the hyper casual games, how do you simplify your game enough that somebody can just use a remote? Because then there's no barrier to entry, right? Literally, they don't have to connect their smartphone to the TV over Wi-Fi. You don't have to have a G-pad and get up via Bluetooth, which sometimes even that can be a little annoying to hook up any device with Bluetooth sometimes. And so I think there's been a lot of series where we have a pretty casual game. And things are easy, but how do you with that so it can work on remote? And I'll give you one caveat: what's your remote? Your remote on your rotating station from your making a flip to the extent I think some other sales cloud with third-party users remote on. So I think we're still working through some of those things, but the onus is really on us as the cloud company to make a SQL integration for it as easy as possible. So,
Thank you. Okay, one investment.
Hey, like the other gentleman there, I'm a big fan of Stadia and making sure and all this really interesting info. Kind of curious about your take on the challenges as it relates to operating costs of cloud gaming. Gaikai and online struggle as an independent entity. Stadia, apparently, Google didn't have the perseverance or maybe the proper unit economics for them to make it worth their while. And given that, with live streaming, it's fundamentally more expensive than doing real-time compression, and you have to have process quality and you have low latency. Do you have any thoughts as to like how that's going to impact the type of games that would be successful, or from your perspective, how that cost might change over time for you?
Yeah, it's something we talk about on a daily basis, actually. So a couple of things that I'll say just to set the state. It is a lot more cost efficient to stream now than it was 5 years ago, and way more than it was 10 years ago. So with Shiroptic, my last company, we invested millions and millions of dollars, and we had our own co-location centers, cross connects between, Equinox and the East Coast and the West Coast and stuff like that. But that took years to kind of build that together. And then we just did, like, if we went over capacity, it automatically jumped up into the cloud because operating on the cloud was really expensive. So we built our own kind of hybrid bare metal solution. With here, it's a bit more efficient already than what it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago when we built out those capabilities. But I think also it's the ability to monetize in a lot more ways, right? And so I think with subscription gaming solutions, they kind of have a fixed amount of cost, and they can only charge but so much to make the solution viable. And then what happens is the more people play, the less money they make. Right? If you're charging a fixed $19.99, you're almost better off if people play less, because if people play too much, you're killing your margins, or even in a really heavy player operating at a loss. When it's ad supported and every time somebody goes to start a game, right, they're seeing an ad, it's a little bit different of an incentive, because in that situation, the more people play, the more ads they see, and that those ads are subsidizing that cloud cost. And so our model is just better, right, in terms of doing that. It's more conducive with the rise of tide kind of floats all boat, as opposed to, oh my goodness, I'm only making $19.99 off for you, and so I don't want you to play too much. So yeah, that's it. It's still expensive either way, but I think it's also growing into kind of what the opportunity is. And I've got two of the biggest investment funds in the world back in the company. I think there's a mindset of let's prove that market is there and fund our way through it.
Thank you. You guys are awesome. We're so engaging. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you. That was very good questions.